Welcome everyone to Jersey WaterWorks' 6th annual conference. Today is day 3 of the conference. You are entering this workshop using data to build trust in our water systems. How do we get it right? My name is Jersey WaterCheck. I'm a program manager at Jersey WaterWorks for the Data Dashboard project. I'm now going to hand it over to our moderator, Stephanie Corso. She's the CEO of Rogue Water. She's also one half of the podcast H2 Duo. Stephanie, over to you. Stephanie, you're on mute.
We just talked about that. I'm so excited. Thank you, Jyoti. I'm so excited to be here to moderate this. We've got a great panel set for you today and some amazing opportunities for you to participate and engage as well that will cue you on throughout this. So please feel giving you the permission to engage. We want to hear from you as well, and to also engage on social media. They've got a hashtag, the hashtag NJWater20, and make sure you tag Jersey WaterWorks. We want to see this blow up on the social media as well. So welcome everyone. Please join me in welcoming our panelists for today's workshop. We have Winifred Victor Hines, Shadi Eskoff, Dan Van Abs, and Stephen Blankenship. Also joining us towards later on in the workshop is going to be Jesse Charette of Raftelis, who will be doing the demo for us for the WaterCheck website. But like I said, we do have some great opportunities to get y'all engaged in the conversation as well. So before we start, we're going to first have a quick audience poll to gauge who's out there, who's joining us. So Jody, can you please launch the poll for us?
The poll has been launched.
We'll give everyone a second to plug in their answer there so we can get a sense of who is in our audience for the conversation. And this is also going to be helpful for our panelists too, as if they know who's listening, they can also speak towards that as well. So
I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. It's about 30 seconds.
Okay.
Cool. So in terms of who is in our audience, we have about 32% who are coming from nonprofit, nearly 12% who are utilities, water and wastewater, and the rest are all split. We have 12% who are engineering and consultants. There are 3 main groups are nonprofit, utility, engineering and consultant. And then you have government, state government folks, federal government, those.
Great. So a pretty diverse audience there, just about as diverse in thought as our panel as well. And I know that all of you are approaching data and data transparency from a different lens. So again, a really important reason why it'll be great to get your engagement and questions throughout. So I'm now going to invite each of our panelists the opportunity to briefly share a little bit about themselves and the work they do, and also I'd like for each of you to share what excites you about data. What is it? Why are you excited to have this conversation with us today? So I'm going to start with Shadi.
Thank you so much. And I'm honored to be invited to speak in this panel and to be part of this panel as well. We have some great speakers here. So thank you everybody for joining. And my name is Shadi Eskoff. I'm a research director at the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. If you're not familiar with the Environmental Finance Center, we are a center within the university, but our focus really has been entirely working on helping local governments, state governments, nonprofits, utilities essentially figure out the questions about how to financially manage environmental systems, which includes water, wastewater, stormwater, and so on. So we work directly with utilities constantly. We work with state governments, nonprofits, for-profits. It doesn't matter if you provide service. We're there to help answer questions. We do a lot of advising and training. Part of the work that we do involves data. And if everybody here knows me personally, you know that I call myself a data nerd. I love data. I love working with data, and data has a really important purpose. One of the tools that we've developed as the Environmental Finance Center for think we have it for about almost 20 states now, are dashboards that allow utilities to compare your rates compared to other utilities of similar characteristics, as well as other financial performance metrics, how those rates compare to income levels of your community, how your rates are structured to incentivize conservation, lots of different data that could be used to understand financial management of the system. And those dashboards are publicly available. They're on our website. You can see the link here. And again, we have them for about 20 states. Unfortunately, we don't have one for New Jersey. Maybe that's, someday in the future we can think about working on that. But I'm happy to answer questions. I'll be mentioning the rates dashboards as we go through this session. Thank you.
Well, you're in good company, Shadi, because you're a data nerd and I'm a water nerd, so you're in good company. And so now I'm going to go to Winifred.
Good morning, all. Thank you. Well, I am a water nerd, but data nerd, not so much. And I am the executive director of Stepping Stones Resources and co-chair of the Newark Environmental Commission and also board member of Clean Water Action, the New Jersey and national. And I've been a social justice and human rights advocate here and abroad, specifically Venezuela, which is when my eyes basically were open to water right issues and made me realize that water has to be an absolute human right. And I became involved with water issues here in Newark when then Mayor Cory Booker, the very same Cory Booker, the object of every suburban mom's fantasies, ooh la la, along with international partners to privatize the water. So the Newark Water Group was formed, and it was made up of a very diverse group of individuals and some grassroots organizations, and mostly Newark residents. Diverse demographics. We had like a 10-year-old all the way up to people in their 70s, if not older, and varied income status, etc. So this is where data played an integral part in our fight against the mayor. So one of our members, Dan O'Flaherty, a Newark native and professor at Columbia University, wrote an investigative report titled Hogwall, an analysis of the activities of the Newark Watershed Conservation and Development Corporation. And this came out in January 2011, which provided plenty of data on the gross mismanagement of the whole Newark Watershed Conservation and Development Corporation, or NWCDC. So the NWCDC was set up in 1973 to help the city manage its land at the Pequannock watershed up there in the Highlands. And since it has morphed into a junior utility authority that sees its job as running the sewer and water system, and although the governing body never authorized it to do so, so how is this allowed to happen? And which is one of the questions we wanted to know. And there were many questions. And as we investigated, we kept finding out more irregularities, which in turn bred more questions. And for example, consultants costs went from maybe $265 in 2004 to $1,577,000 in 2009, which represented like a 39% of the total increase. So this was all according to Dan's report. And he went, through the minutes, the expenditures, salaries, pensions, interior designs, etc. Very thorough. And due to this report and the relentless activism of the Newark Water Group, and this was over a period of several years, there was an investigation. So in 2013, the NWCDC was taken over by provisional trustees from the Superior Court, and it was dissolved. And in 2014, the Office of the State Controller of New Jersey came out with an investigative report on the NWCDC. And a few people, including the executive director, went to jail, and the last person was sentenced in December 2019. And in the meantime, around 2015, the NWCDC had gone bankrupt. So all this because we researched and compiled the data used to help support and confirm what we observed and discovered, whether anecdotally or scientifically. and presented them objectively and accurately. So Jody, you can show, oh, okay, here they are. And let me increase. So these two slides show some of the activities that the Newark Water Group was involved in, through the data. So it was about educating the public. And then we also, did petitions and, had like sit-ins in front of City Hall. So all of that because of that one little analysis report. Thank you.
Thank you, Winifred, for bringing in that community perspective. Dan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why data is of interest to you?
Well, I could say it's because I'm at Rutgers University and I'm an academic, but actually it goes back a lot farther than that. I spent my career in state government in New Jersey dealing with water resources issues, water planning and water management, watershed management, as a manager with several different state agencies, and thought I was going to retire, but wound up being an accidental academic at Rutgers University, so I'm an associate professor there. The key thing for me is that if we want to aspire to a better situation, we need to know what our current situation is. And so data is a major, the gathering of data, but more importantly, the understanding of the data is a critical function that all of us can play in terms of setting the scene, understanding where we are and where we aren't, and then helping to move toward that. So that's really my focus. I have been involved with Jersey WaterWorks before there was a Jersey WaterWorks, from our very first meeting in Jersey City a number of years ago, 7 years ago, I think now. And so part of my role is to help Jersey WaterWorks and New Jersey Future do a lot of the background data analysis and gathering to help the organization move forward. So that's where I am. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, clarity with the data is also key. Stephen, give us a little insight into your background and what your take on data.
So I have just about 30 years experience in the water and wastewater field, usually with utilities. I'm a licensed professional engineer. I hold all 5 of DEP operator license to some degree. And for the last 20 years, I've been the executive director and chief engineer of the Hamilton Township MUA, which is located just outside of Atlantic City. We're on the small side of a medium utility. I've been involved nationally with AWWA. I had the chance to serve as a volunteer vice president for them for 2 years, a couple of years ago. I've been involved in the New Jersey section of AWWA and the New Jersey Water Environment Association, New Jersey Water Association, and lately I've gotten involved with Jersey WaterWorks on their asset management committee. As a utility executive, it's important to have good data. And as a smaller utility, it's critical what data really matters. So it's one thing, as Dan said, to collect data. It's another thing to understand it. But what data do you really need to make your organization work and to improve it? So that's kind of how I got into this, because depending on your size, you might have certain resources, so you kind of have to pick and choose what you have to do.
Well, I'm definitely so interested to hear all the different perspectives that we have on this panel. But Stephen, you're really speaking my language. Before I went rogue and started Rogue Water, our communication company, and then Rogue Water Lab, our nonprofit, I spent a decade doing public engagement, outreach, and communication for municipal water utilities. So that is, our resumes probably look more similar than you think. But let's get into our panel. As I mentioned before, we're going to be giving you a lot of opportunities as the audience to engage via either chat questions or Q&A feature, or the Q&A feature, which I'll be sure to prompt you on. And then my colleague Jyoti, who is backstage, is going to be monitoring those and curating those questions for us. So we'll have the opportunity to respond to them later. But also, I just wanted to, for everyone to kind of, before we get into the questions, imagine this workshop as we're about to embark on this learning journey together. So throughout our discussion today, You will hear about perceptions on water, perception gaps, how data can help bridge that gap, some of the opportunities and risks that come with being more transparent with data, some state level policy work that's happening around it. And then we will end with a demo of the Jersey WaterCheck, which is Jersey WaterWorks Innovative Dashboard. So let's get started. We're going to start our journey with a discussion on public perception about water and water infrastructure. These perceptions are what often drive the trust our community, our customers have in water and water infrastructure. So with this in mind, I would like to invite all of you, our audience, to please use the chat feature and respond to the question that Jyoti is putting in the chat now. And that question is, what are some common perceptions that you have heard about water and water infrastructure? So I will give Jyoti a few minutes to get that up and a few minutes for you to respond. And then she's going to let me know what she hears back from you.
The chat question is on the chat for the audience to respond. So please start using the chat feature to share some of your common perceptions you've heard. We're already seeing some of them come through. Water infrastructure is expensive. Theme seems to be expensive, not maintained adequately. Boiled water is better.
Yeah, bottled water is better. That one feels like a gut punch sometimes.
Customers don't think about water and wastewater infrastructure unless something goes wrong. Out of sight, out of mind, that's a common perception. Yeah, another perception I'm seeing is public is often told fixing would cost a lot. Not maintained or managed, bottled water is safer. That's a common perception. Over to you, Stephanie.
Right, so I feel like most of those probably were not a surprise to any of our panelists or to any of us who have spent any amount of time in this industry. But I loved how in your introduction, Dan, you talked about you have to have a good sense of where you're at before you could really begin to figure out where you want to go. And that's really where our conversation is going to start. So Jersey WaterWorks is currently re-administering a public opinion survey to gauge perceptions and to see what our starting point is. This same survey was done 3 years ago as well. So this first question will go to you, Winnie. What were some of the most prevalent perceptions community members have about their water from that survey that was done in the past?
Okay, well, the survey that you're referring to was the Jersey WaterWorks New Jersey Future survey of 2018 and titled People Care About Water Infrastructure. And basically people in New Jersey and across the nation, they prize clean water. So 91% of New Jerseyans prioritize protecting the drinking water supply, which outranked 9 other issues, including improving education and reducing property taxes. 62% of New Jersey residents said water pollution was a very or somewhat serious problem. 92% of New Jersey residents believe that ensuring all people have safe drinking water and it should be a priority for the legislature and governor. And they share concerns about their water systems, and it showed they had very little confidence in their state governments to ensure safe water and other basic services. And 70% said they were not very confident in their state's government's ability to ensure the safety of their water. 67% said they are not very confident about the public water system. 52% were concerned about the quality of drinking water, with 33% very concerned. 78% said it's extremely or very important for the president and Congress to develop a plan to rebuild our water infrastructure, and 50% of all adults polled fear the quality of their drinking water. Now, also it showed the average household spends 8% of its monthly utility costs on water, wastewater, and stormwater services, compared to 47% on phone, internet, and cable. And 6 in 10 Americans also willing to pay $7.70 more each month to upgrade the nation's water system. Also the elected officials prioritize water infrastructure investments too. Now, I also compared this survey to a July 2020 Consumer Reports magazine posted an article and an investigative report that they did with The Guardian on the analysis of U.S. cities, which shows emergency on affordability of running water amid the COVID pandemic. And to summarize, millions of ordinary Americans are facing rising and unaffordable bills for running water and risk being disconnected or losing their homes if they cannot pay. So it was an analysis of 12 diverse cities. Unfortunately, New Jersey wasn't one of the cities included, but you had Philadelphia, Indianapolis, and some others. And it shows that the combined price of water and sewage increased by an average of 80% between 2010 and 2018, with more than 2/5 of residents in some cities living in neighborhoods with unaffordable bills. And in this survey, water bills that exceed 4% of household income are considered unaffordable. And there is also a problem with flooding and the backing up of the sewer system in Newark. You know, whenever it rains, there are some parts of the city that floods. And since it has a combined sewer overflow or CSO, there's always an issue. And I don't think that there's a Newark resident who has never been inconvenienced by flooding, myself included. And so flooding and sewage overflow is a constant, and one learns to make the best of it. You find alternate routes, you know, and you deal with it. My next door neighbor's, her home was just flooded. So in terms of a lot of the concerns, you see a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, so that really gives us a sense of what some of those perceptions are locally here. But let's pivot right quick to the national level. So Shadi, you work with data across 19 states. So it will be interesting to hear if you're noticing the same things on a national level. What do you see as a common trend in the perceptions of water at the local level, and how do you think this influences decision making?
Thanks. Well, I agree with everything that Winnie said, and those trends are not just local, these are national trends that we're seeing across the board. So just a little bit more background, our focus again has been on the financial management of utilities. I saw in the chat a lot of folks saying, you know, one of the perceptions is water quality. That's definitely something we keep hearing about. It's not something that I specialize in, but that is definitely one of those perception issues that, and I agree with a lot of folks who said that the public doesn't think about water and wastewater until something goes wrong. And that's usually if the water quality is bad or something's wrong with the infrastructure. But the other side, which a lot of folks have also commented on, and what Whitney has also mentioned, is it comes down to the finances and the management of the systems. What we're seeing with trends of all the data from all the different states that we've analyzed, we've been tracking rates and financial performance of utilities for a lot of these utilities. I mean, basically, they're statewide surveys, and we've been tracking them over many years. I can tell you that water and wastewater rates are going up faster than inflation. In most cases, it's more than twice as the rate of inflation. Income is definitely not going up as quickly as inflation. In addition, capital costs are going up much faster than even the rates are going up, which means that, and that's not just capital costs for future infrastructure, that's just the cost of the same materials and the same construction labor that you would need today 5 years from now is going to be much more expensive than it is today. So with capital costs going up and rates are going up, affordability is becoming definitely a huge trend, and one of the things that the public is now paying attention to, and a lot of utilities are starting to have to address. So that's one of the main things. But capital costs going up is a major thing. So it all comes back to when it comes to perception is if the utility raises rates, the public, those that are paying attention will notice that the rates are going up, and they will mention or they will complain that, hey, we've been paying higher and higher bills. I'm not using any more water, but my bill keeps going up. Why is my local government utility inefficient? Why is it wasteful? Where's my money going to? And they don't understand utility finance, and they don't understand the future, that costs are going up, and that it's not going to go down anytime soon. That if anything, the capital costs that a lot of small systems are facing are going to make the rates even much higher going forward. So there's a perception there of maybe the government is just wasting our money, that it's not efficient, and it's not fair that we have to pay this much money without understanding why the rates are going up. And then there's also an equity issue when it comes to, the utilities rates are going up and folks are not able, there's a bigger portion of customers who can't pay their bills. They get cut off because they're not paying their bills. We're seeing that that's sometimes disproportionate across the customer base. And there's an equity issue that's now also starting to grow as well. And that creates also a public perception that the utility is not managing itself correctly. Now, I want to defend the utilities and say that all the utilities that we work with are trying their best, and that they're facing very difficult situation where the costs are much higher. And it'll be nice to hear from Stephen. The costs keep going up, and they have to find a way to be financially sustainable. So it's not an easy thing for utilities to manage, and they're doing what they can, but it's just the perception that that the customers don't understand and don't get the full picture just by seeing that the rates are going up.
Yeah, so that's a great segue to kind of the next angle that we're going to look at these perceptions, because I hear a lot of this sounds like this gap between perception and reality, and some of that is due to there's a gap in data, and really that's when people don't have the information they need to make an informed decision. And we know that there's often a gap between the perceptions that we just heard about and to your point, Shadi, the vast amount of work that's being done behind the scenes 24/7 to ensure the services reach everyone. So let's dive into that a little bit more and talk about how we can bridge this gap using information and data. But first, let's get a sense of the sources of information. Again, like doing what Dan preaches and finding out where we're at before we can talk about where we're going. So this goes to you, audience. This is another question for you. We're going to have a poll question this time. So Jyoti, if you can go on ahead and launch our next poll. And this one is, how do you get the best or most useful information about your utility? So we're going to give everyone a few minutes to plug in their responses to the poll.
And the audience, your poll has already started, so please respond. I'm going to go ahead and stop the poll now. Okay, so the poll has ended, and here's our response. Almost 39% said that they get their information about their utility through web search. About 34% said news media can be digital, online, or paper. And then you have roughly 12% saying the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection website, 9% choosing social media, and 4% saying utility bill inserts. Nobody said ask my neighbor or friend.
Which is surprising because y'all are in the water industry, so you got straight from the horse's mouth. Yeah, so none of that is really surprising. The news media is interesting in the research that we've done. It shows that the majority of people go to social media first, even if it's to go to that news story that then takes them to where they want to go. But that is a national trend that the majority of people do go to social media to find their information first. But getting back to the idea of this perception gap here, and Shadi, you had said you wanted to hear from Stephen, and I do as well. And so what we've kind of talked about so far is where people get their information from, plus the accuracy and clarity of the information they receive can help bridge the perception gap, and data can play a critical role. So Stephen, I want to start with you. Let's hear more on your thoughts around that and what role you think data can play to bridge that gap in perception.
So I think, when it comes to perception, it's interesting. I've had a chance, one of my board members is a professor at a community college, and I've been invited there a few times to speak on water infrastructure and some other things. And one of the questions I always put at the end is, Paul, like, what's a gallon of gas cost? What's a gallon of milk cost? What's a gallon of water cost, or whatnot? And then, the students go through and they do their poll. And then when I tell them from a public utility, they're probably going to pay, they can get 1,000 gallons for like $3. It just boggles their mind, especially when they talk about, getting a cup of coffee or something like that at some of the places. So, perception is, and I think that's one thing that people don't understand, that, from a water utility perspective, tap water really does deliver. And, our price is very low. Now, do costs go up? Yes, they do. I think you've hit on some of those things, but a lot of us try to do our best and with competing things. But the problem is a lot of people don't know that. And for a long time, utilities really were out of sight, out of mind. And I think that perception is now changing. We have to tell our story more. One of the things that I'm doing here at my utility is we're changing our logo to say, as part of the logo, it's your hometown utility. It's not like you call the electric company. It's not like you call the phone company or whoever. When you call us, somebody answers the phone, and we typically respond. And again, going to that equity thing that you talked about, our ratepayers own our utility as a public utility. So, and a lot of people, they don't realize that maybe if they bought a house or, where they're renting, that there was money paid to build that system, and that's part of their system. So how do we keep that going? And I think that's the big thing. We need to tell our story a little bit more. And that's, that's difficult sometimes. Again, as a medium-sized utility, it's hard for me sometimes because we wear a lot of different hats. And while our intentions are good, at the end of the day, you only have so much time, and sometimes those things tend to fall out. But I think one of the things is in New Jersey, especially for public utilities, we do put a lot of information on our website. And I know Jersey WaterWorks is looking at, how accessible is that? How easily can somebody go and find that out? And one of the biggest pieces of information somebody can really rely on is a consumer confidence report. And on most of our websites, you're going to have quite a few years of consumer confidence reports. And that really tells you a lot about your system. And a lot of people really don't understand that or take the time to look at that. And that would be one of the first things I say. If you really want to understand about your utility, the basics, what kind of testing we have to do, that would be a great place to go.
Stephen, you're singing my song, and I love it when you talk about telling your story. I think that's such an important message for utilities to hear. And I love that you talked about consumer confidence reports, because I think that really is a missed opportunity for us to do something engaging and creative to give to our community members to understand that, to your point, that it's their system, it's a public system that they did make an investment in. So love all of that. Winnie, do you have anything to add as being someone else kind of your finger on the pulse of the community? What role do you think data can play to bridge that gap in perception from your perspective?
I loved also what Stephen said, and based on the notion that data is used to help to support and confirm what is observed, and there's always what the customer perceives to be true, and what the data states. So sometimes they align perfectly, but lots of times the data do not align with the customer's expectations or belief. For instance, with the Newark lead and water crisis, the city and the EPA are telling the residents that the water is perfectly safe. Yet we know that there is absolutely no amount of safe lead, and sometimes it comes, and when it comes usually accompanied with mercury and arsenic, and Newark does have arsenic in its water. And there are also differing perceptions in terms of the service provided, the managerial competence, cost, expenses, and also that gap in perception when the public deems what is important and what is really a pressing matter. And for example, when the mayor took office in 2015, the top 5 issues he said that he was going to focus on were crime, economic and development, budget, unemployment, and political alliances, whatever that is. And so, to my knowledge, water was not mentioned, nothing about the drinking water or flooding, which is strange considering when he was running for city council and the Newark Water Group was fighting for water rights, he joined forces with us. And so did Booker before he became mayor. So there's also that, the polarization, not just political, but in terms of racial disparities, differing beliefs and views. And though data in the past have consistently lumped socioeconomic status, like white poverty with race when it came to exposures to environmental toxin. But I was reading this book recently, Harriet A. Washington's book, A Terrible Thing to Waste, and I highly recommend it. And it talks about newer, quote, newer scientific reports have consistently demonstrated that race poses a stronger risk factor for the placement of environmental poisons than poverty. And poverty is a driver of environmental exposures, but race is a great driver. So she goes on to state that middle-class African-American households with incomes between $50,000 and $60,000 live in neighborhoods that are more polluted than those of very poor white households with incomes below $10,000. So the data has to be also free of bias, able to stand on its own, and it has to be factual and uncorrupted, so to speak.
Yeah, so I like how you pointed out that gap again between what's being said and then what the data is showing. So the perception gap has an impact, and data can play a huge role in building in trust by kind of bringing those things closer together. So many of us are familiar with the phrase of we live in an information age, and yet living in a data transparent world or where information is shared easily brings opportunities, but also comes with some risk. Once again, we want to hear from our audience on this. So this is going to be another audience chat question. So check out the chat feature and respond. And this question will be, what opportunities do you see with data when it is made more accessible? So if you can check out the chat box, throw that in chat, and Jyoti, if you'll let me know some of the responses you see come in.
Thanks, Stephanie. I think it might be helpful if you also start reading the response, because it seems like I'm coming too quiet.
Oh, okay.
So, yes. So I'm just monitoring the chat, but feel free to start reading out responses as well, so it's more clear for folks.
All right. Okay, so don't see anything coming in yet, but what opportunities do you see when when it is made more accessible? When we have more data transparency, what kind of opportunities do you feel like that creates? So we've got implementing more machine learning to treatment, so maybe some more acceptance around AI, getting into AI conversation. I was going to say early in the morning, I'm in Texas, so I'm an hour earlier. It's still, I know it's getting towards lunchtime on y'all side. Let me see. Any other opportunities there are to being more transparent around the data that we have in the water sector? More effective opportunities for more effective advocacy. Absolutely.
If I may, I think the dashboards that the Environmental Finance Center works on, you do have a couple of utilities from New Jersey And I think some of those and the Jersey WaterCheck checklist that we'll go over later, that can start to give you a little bit of a story about what's going on with your utility. And that'll give you a little bit more data. One of the things with data and the nuances, and we'll probably talk a little bit later, is each utility is unique. So in some cases, if utilities have been reinvesting in their systems for some time, they're probably doing a pretty good job and their rates are probably somewhat stable. But if the infrastructure has been ignored for a while, and then all of a sudden, as a utility, you come in and you say, okay, we need to start to invest, that can cause some problems because people are used to rates where maybe the costs were really underfunded. And now that you're actually trying to maintain and improve the system, you're going to have to, see that rates are going up, and there are going to be impacts that way. And again, that's, some systems are relatively new, some systems are a lot older, and depending on what kind of maintenance and care that they had, that all can affect our cost and, what kind of data that we're trying to track.
Absolutely. We just had a few more come in with connecting data to stories for more impactful messaging, hopefully a better understanding of water finance, but I might be overly optimistic. Glenn, you're welcome to be overly optimistic. We'll take it. But thanks for taking the lead on that, Stephen, because actually I do want to hear some more perspectives from the panel. We have such a diverse perspectives from academia to utility to community national. So definitely thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Shadi, do you have any perspective on some opportunities you see in getting it right when it comes to data, as well as what some of those risks might be too?
I do, but I'm going to defer to Dan because I think he was trying to say something a little bit earlier.
I'm sorry, I missed you.
Dan, you go first, Mike.
That's the problem with all these little boxes. I feel like I'm on Hollywood Squares or something like that. But the good thing about data is that you can use it in wonderful ways. The bad thing about data is that if it's not tied to communication, it's useless. So part of the struggle that we constantly have, there are a lot of people who will tend to shoot from the lip, if you will. They're not really connecting with solid information. They have perceptions. Part of what we can do with good data that is well organized and provided is give people who are responsible for communication, for interacting with broader audiences, whether that's the news media or politicians or whatever, we can give them access to information that can help frame what they say, frame their stories, so that they're going in the right direction instead of just picking up on an anecdote and just going way off in right or left field or wherever. I have to be fair to both sides there. So the connection of data to communication is the absolutely fundamental step. And I have to say, we're not really all that good at it yet. And especially with the splitting of media and so we're picking up only on information from their own side. Breaking through that and figuring out how we get the data used by everybody is going to be the really critical function for us.
Yes, preach on, Dan. Okay. Shadi, did you? Thank you for. I saw a flash, but I didn't quite catch it. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. But did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, and I'm going to piggyback on Dan's comments about communication at the end of what I'm going to say. But I think when it comes to data and how data can be used in this case, there are two different things that come to mind. One is at the utility level, you could use data as a way to track your own performance. So I would recommend, looking for creating some benchmarks and to quantify data and use data to objectively track how the utility is doing, so that you can make better decisions going forward. So that's one way to use data, is internally for decision-making purposes. The second part is when you're communicating with general public, you want to be able to kind of show how your utility is doing compared to a lot of others in the state, or benchmark against the country, or whatever you want to do. But use data to show that how your system is doing. and to answer some of those questions, some of those or address some of the misperceptions that your customers have about your system. Well, if they think that $30 a month is too expensive, and you're showing that really $30 a month in our state is one of the lowest rates that you have, or that the rates that we're charging is enough to meet all of our expenses, but look at all these other utilities. So benchmarking against other systems as well is another way of using data to help communicate and to help address some of the perception questions that we're talking about. The same thing goes with water quality. Some folks are talking about consumer confidence reports and how the water quality matches against regulations. I agree with Winnie that their regulations are one thing, but there are additional. There's no such thing as safe arsenic. So there's but you can still kind of use that data to benchmark and to communicate better. And then to add to what Dan was saying about communication, I 100% agree that if you've got all this data and you're not using it either for decision-making purposes or to share with your public and to communicate the results of this, then it's kind of like the tree that falls in the forest and no one hears it. What's the point of having that data? So that's why I think having those kind of dashboards, and I'd love to hear about some of the dashboards that you all are working on at the end of this session, but the rates dashboards are publicly available. And we've had media, we've had reporters, we've had customers call us up because they've looked at that dashboard and are starting to understand a little bit more about their utilities' financial performance, as well as how their rates compare to others as well. So having these kind of benchmarking tools and data that's provided publicly and sharing it. And we know some utilities that have been writing press releases, copying some of the results of those dashboards so they can communicate with their customers. I completely 100% agree with what Dan was saying on that front.
Yeah, and I love that you and Stephen have both mentioned dashboards and how those can be kind of that connection point to bridging the two, how we tell our story and the data we use to do it. But I know for a lot of folks in our industry, that creates this level of a transparency that can be feel a little uncomfortable or a little risky, a little daunting. But it's that degree of, you got to be a little uncomfortable to help build that trust with your community. Because sometimes those engagements that come out of transparency come from news outlets or the media or whatever you want to call it. And this news coverage is often the dominant storyteller, which to Stephen's point, it shouldn't be. We should be telling our own story. And their stories can shape perception. So again, this is to all of you. How much of a role do you think these dashboards can play in changing the way that our story gets told? And I'll shoot that to like Winnie. Do you have, you can toss it back at me and I'll toss it to someone else. But what are your kind of thoughts on how we can use dashboards to change the way we tell our story?
Yeah, I agreed with what was said earlier. And also it's a matter, of trust, like Dan said, also communication. Because I remember when I first arrived, or when I first moved to Newark, everybody was raving about the water. So people had this absolute trust on, about the water. It was like, yeah, this woman even took it with her when she traveled, and everybody was talking about how great the water is, but yeah, it's great at the source. But once it travels through the pipes and then it comes out, of the tap, then it's no longer that pristine water that's at the source. And so come to now where people have completely lost trust in the water. They no longer trust the water that's coming out of their tap, in terms of brushing, whatever it is with it. And I mean, just think also in terms of, the perception, what is said by the representatives, the officials. Think President Obama drinking a glass of Flint, Michigan water and saying the water is fine. Well, the water wasn't fine. So it's how we relay the message. So the dashboard would help that, because then it has the concrete numbers, the transparency, if it's done correctly and if it's factual, to rebuild that trust, because people no longer have the trust. And as you see, all these people buying up bottled water, which drives me crazy, but it's from lack of trust. So another environmental degradation, all the plastics that are going in the environment. And in bottled water, they're not even regulated. So some of them have the same things that are coming out of, your tap water.
Great. I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to our show and tell with the dashboard at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of bring things in a little closer to home. I've really enjoyed hearing all of your different perspectives on tackling this issue of data transparency. So while there is a clear role for data in building trust, policy initiatives, policy initiatives impact, our data gathering landscape. And I'm referring to New Jersey's Water Quality Accountability Act. So Steve, Dan, this is for you. What are some ways by which that act has changed the landscape for utilities? And I'll start with you, Stephen, and then Dan, if you'll add.
Well, just to give a brief little background on the water quality accountability, right now we have to do an annual certification, and that's for all public water systems that have 500 or more service connections. So if your utilities are very small and only has 200 service connections, they're not going to be impacted by this. One of the things now is for a investor-owned utility, a corporate officer now has to sign off on the certification. For a municipal utility authority, it has to be the executive director. And if it's a municipally owned system, it's either has to be the mayor or the chief executive for that municipality. What's interesting, if people start to share this, some of the requirements that you have to address as part of this certification is, number one, are you compliant with federal safe drinking water regulations? So you have to answer yes or no. And if you say no, then you're going to have to give an explanation as to what you're doing, try to come back into a compliance. The same thing with the New Jersey state water regulations. You have to, again, say yes or no there. Do you have the properly licensed operator for your system? So if your system's at a certain level, do you have a licensed operator or operators that are at that appropriate level? There's some systems where they have a hard time and they may not have that. Your water allocation. So in New Jersey, the state owns all the water and they allocate it out to the utilities. So you have an allocation permit. How are you doing with that? Are you over your permit? And if you are, why? So those are some of the things you have to look at. From an inspection point of view, that I think, utilities, good utilities are probably already doing this. But if we weren't, and in some cases my utility wasn't, we now have to check our fire hydrants at least annually. Most of us probably do that at least once a year, and a lot of us do it twice a year. Are those hydrants labeled now? So now if there's a problem, there's a label on there, and it's going to address who owns that hydrant, at least from a utility perspective. If it is a private hydrant, that wouldn't be addressed. But under the WQAA, somebody could go by and say, hey, there's a problem with this hydrant. They could call up and say, hey, your hydrant number such and such has a problem. We have to do valve inspections. So on valves that are greater than or equal to 12 inches, we're supposed to inspect those every 2 years. So, and if it's less than 12 inches, it's every 4 years. So what does that do? That helps ensure the operability of the system. So if we do have a problem and we need to shut down the system, hopefully know that the valves will hold so we can limit the number of customers that we have to take out of service if we have to do a repair. If you have problems with your valves and you go to close a valve and that doesn't close, now you have to go to the next valve. So that's that many more people that may be affected by that shutdown. So, again, do we know where the locations of those are? So that's becoming key, because we kind of knew, but now they have to be labeled, they have to be GPSed, so we have that information that we can put in. Do we have cybersecurity? A lot of control systems are internet related, and before there really wasn't anything out there that said you had to have a program in place. Well, now the WQAA requires that you have that program, and you have to state that you've submitted that to the appropriate state agency. Do you have violations? So did you have violations? And if you did, what did you do to mitigate those violations? Do you have an asset management plan? And is it being implemented? So in our case, we're working on ours. We've been working on it for a while, but hopefully we'll get to the point where it's ready to go, and it'll keep being the living document that it needs to be. And I think one of the other things that's going to come out of this going forward is we're going to have to start to report what we've been spending on our capital improvements. And so DEP has been working with various groups to try to come up with a form to address those. But one of the many things, like when we go before the state legislature or on a federal level, a lot of the questions are, well, how much money do we need? How much money do we need to address these things? So hopefully what's going to come out of this reporting plan is we will start to address what are our future needs on a short-term basis and then like on a 10-year basis. So now the state will start to have information as to how much money do we need and where can we go get funding sources. So if we're trying to participate in the state revolving fund, if we can show a greater need, then maybe we can get a greater share of that funding to the state, which then helps offset our costs to our ratepayers. So I think it's a good start. It still has a ways to go. One of the things that we need to be careful that we don't become too prescriptive, especially with some of the legislation that's introduced, because things change and technologies change. So we need to have some flexibility. So we need to work with DEP when they come up with the regulations to allow for changes in technology or changes in the way that we might be able to do work. So from a utility perspective, I think it's been good because now it's easier to go back to a board. It's easier to go back to a municipality that governs and say, here's the plan, here's the data that helps support that plan, and this is what we need to do to maintain our system and to try to keep our rates in an affordable manner.
Gotcha. And Dan, how do you think that WQAA has changed the landscape from your perspective?
The biggest way I think it's changed the landscape is by creating common expectations. And if you look back prior to the act, what you see was that the DEP's regulations primarily focused on, I guess, three things. One is, are you meeting the drinking water quality standards? Well, that's always important, but it's very end of pipe. Second is anything that you build that you put into the system, is it designed and constructed properly? So that's the treatment works approval process. And the third is, are you maintaining constant good pressure in your system so as to avoid contamination coming into your system? But that didn't get to the infrastructure. And so now we have an act that is focusing utilities on infrastructure in, for some of them in a way that they've been doing for years, but in others, a way that they really haven't been doing for decades. So creating common expectations so that we know that once everybody gets up and running and is fully conversant with this, maybe 3-5 years from now, we should know, we should have a comfort and a confidence that all of the utilities that are covered by this act are dealing with their asset management, are dealing with their programs in at least a much better way than they have in the past. So that's really the critical thing. The other one, and I think Steve is right on point with regard to this, we keep on saying we need money, we need money, we need money, this is going to cost a lot of money. And the constant question that comes back is, for what? And we say, well, for stuff, right? We're going to have to redo a lot of stuff. The asset management programs and the schedules for capital projects and so on will give us the ability to really start nailing down hard figures on just what that is and how much it will cost. When people ask me, and members of the legislature have in committee sessions asked me, well, how much is this going to cost? The answer is we don't really know. We don't really know. There are a lot of estimates out there, but we don't really know. And so this will give us a way of really knowing.
Yeah, so some of the things that you said, that both of you said, really touched on being more proactive and ways to mitigate risk, but like dive in specifically, how can the WQAA system data and transparency lead to more proactive water system management and the mitigation of risk?
Well, I think one of the things is the certification in and of itself. There was never anything like that before. And now, you're talking about the top levels of management. So if a licensed operator or, the operating people, or, basically you have to look at the whole utility too. It's not just operations. There's the finance side, there's the customer service side. It's a complete package. But as people come now to upper management and say, hey, here's our data based on our asset management plan. This is what we should be doing. And if they don't do that, then they're going to have to say why and come up with a game plan as to how they're going to do that. And I think that's the big thing that basically I think in the past, it's been easy to kick things down the road because, I don't want to raise rates because I'm going to be up for an election or, something along that line. And so this theoretically would now start to say, you need to spend some money. And if you're not going to do that, there's going to be consequences to that. And so hopefully you don't get into this, going forward that, the systems are maintained. So number one, we're not trying to play catch up and probably have to spend more money in the catch up mode rather than in a regular maintenance mode. And basically, hopefully also going forward, it'll give some direction as to what costs are going to be as we move forward, because now you're going to have more information to plan on. And as part of that, it's one thing to come up with that, but you also need a financial plan as to how you're going to address those needs. And I think that's the other key part that's probably been missing in the past.
Yeah. And Dan, do you have anything to add to that around proactivity and risk mitigation?
Yes, and Steve hit the nail on the head there. It's this question of liability at this point that's been established. It used to be that the most of the state requirements were focused on the treatment plant operator signing off on things, and that's very unfair because they're not in charge of budgets, right? So having this elevated up, if it's a public system that's not an MUA, then it's the mayor, right? So the whole system in New Jersey for public entities has been focused in past years on making sure that they're not spending more money than they have revenue to cover. They haven't been focused on whether they're spending enough money to deal with the management of their system. And the Water Quality Accountability Act is going to start forcing that conversation in places like the Department of Community Affairs, which is not DEP. They're not regulating the environment, they're regulating budgets. And so I think there's going to be a really significant change in the tenor of the conversation with that agency, among others.
Wow. Well, I think you guys have both done a great job of creating clarity around the WQAA and what that means in real life, everyday impacts. And we've heard a lot today already through the conversation about the absolute importance of why we need to build trust and understanding around our water systems with the communities that we're engaging with the outlets that are telling our story. But really excited to kind of see this in action through an actual dashboard. And so we're going to wrap up our learning journey with a showcase of the Jersey WaterCheck. But before we do that, Dan, could you talk a little bit about its purpose and the role that it can play given kind of everything that we've talked about?
Certainly. So let's start out with the purpose of Jersey WaterWorks. And the stated purpose is to transform New Jersey's inadequate water infrastructure through sustainable, cost-effective solutions that provide communities with clean water and waterways, healthier, safer neighborhoods, local jobs, flood and climate resilience, and economic growth. All right. So Jersey WaterWorks is about change. The WaterCheck program is to provide the information necessary to support that larger purpose. That's really what it's all about. And so Jersey WaterWorks' aspiration is to take where we are right now with regard to WaterCheck, and then over years add information to it, not on a real-time basis, but periodically, and show the progress that New Jersey has been making relative to where we are today. So that's really the purpose of WaterCheck. So WaterCheck is basically to serve as an honest broker function. What's the real information? How do you play it out across the state? How do you compare information from one entity to another, from one time to another? And so some of these are regulatory requirements. Some of these are professional best practices. Some of these are absolutely just aspirational. They're not based in law or regulations or anything like that. They're just hopes for the future. Some of the metrics are yes/no metrics. You either meet water quality standards or you don't. And some of them are more comparisons across a range, like water losses. Are you losing X amount of water from your system or Y amount of water from your system? And so what we come right down to is that the integrity of what we provide and how we explain it to the public is critical to the function of WaterCheck. So the hope is that we'll start countering misperceptions that are out there, and we'll start creating good perceptions, proper perceptions, I guess I should say, from that perspective. So that's really what WaterCheck is all about.
Great, and I think now is when Jesse is going to screen share to share the dashboard. And if you can kind of narrate us through some of these user capabilities of the dashboard, Dan, that would be great.
Okay, and thanks, Jesse Charette from Raftellus. Raftellus is the consultant working with Jersey WaterWorks and New Jersey Future on the development of this. And what you're seeing here is the front page for Jersey WaterCheck. I will note this is not yet a public site. We are today going into testing of this with a number of stakeholders within New Jersey. You folks who are going to be testing this will be receiving an email on how to get into the system, but we're going to show you a little bit of how it works. This is the entry point that you're seeing on your screen, and what you see up toward the top is that we're at the home page. There are 3 different tabs up there. One is the benchmark hub, and this is sort of a statewide look at what is in the system for various metrics that we're using, various measures that we're using. You can also go and take a look at a system. So you go into System Finder and you can hunt for a very specific water or sewer system in here, and we will do that later on. Steve Blankenship's utility is going to be our guinea pig for this one. And finally, there are a number of documents that are from Jersey WaterWorks that are part of the system. All right, so if we move down a little bit on the site, what you will start seeing here is there's another button for looking for a system. So there are a lot of ways of getting to that. And then it starts showing the Jersey WaterWorks goals. So here there are 4 different goals. Everybody who's involved in Jersey WaterWorks should have these memorized by now. But the question of effective and financially sustainable systems, empowering stakeholders, successful and beneficial green infrastructure, and then dealing with the combined sewer overflow issue. And for each one of these, it shows then automatically the sub-goals and the measures that are associated with each one of these sub-goals. So that's one way of getting into this. I will mention that WaterCheck in some cases has enough information that we break all of the different systems into tiers by size, the very large ones, the large ones, medium ones. In other cases, we are focused just on the very large systems and we don't have that sort of breakdown. Okay, so let's click a metric. We're going to go into the effective and financially sustainable utility systems. And we want to take a look at the percentage of drinking water utilities that complied with primary drinking water quality standards. All right, so we went into the goal, then the sub-goal under maintaining systems, and then we click on that. And what it does is it brings up this chart right at the top, which again gives you the ability to look at the goals, the sub-goals, and metrics and change your mind. It's, oh, I didn't want that one, I wanted a different metric. And so you click on that measure. But then if we go further down, what you find is this is a statewide roll-up on the percentage of drinking water utilities that comply with this primary drinking water quality standards, state level. And in this case, we were able to get information from the DEP over a series of years. And so you see a time scale. And you see that we're very close to 100%, but we are not at 100%. And so from an aspirational perspective, what we would all love to get to is 100% compliance year after year. We're not there yet. So that's one way of going through this site. So let's go through and take a look for a specific system. And so we move back up to the top, we check System Finder, and in this case, we're going to search on Hamilton Township MUA. And there it is. I would note that if a utility owns two different systems, a water supply system and a wastewater system, or multiple different systems under water supply, each one of them comes up separately here, so that we're not trying to cram too much information under a single utility. So here we are, there's Hamilton Township in Atlantic County, and you can see a little bit of information there, but also a Learn More button. So you hit Learn More, and up comes a bit of information. So there's a description of the system, there's a small paragraph on the system, and then as we scroll down on this, what you will see is that for each one of the goals, it shows the results of the measures for each one of those systems, for each one of those goals. So in this case, let's take a quick look, and we're going to go under the empowered stakeholders. Jody is trying to text me, and I can't do this and that at the same time, so I'm just ignoring her text. And so what we want to do is just quickly take a look at under this, how customer friendly is my system. And one of the items there is the number of clicks that it takes to get to your consumer confidence report. And it says 2 clicks. Okay, well, that's wonderful. It takes 2 clicks. That's not a lot of effort to get to what is a federally mandated report. So that's great. How does it compare to the rest of the state? So let's click on 2 clicks on that orange button, and it takes you back to the benchmark hub. But it looks a little different because in this case, we're showing the data with all of the different utilities that have been assessed. And there in the orange bar is Hamilton Township MUA. So you can see how they relate to everybody else. And there are a bunch of utilities that take 3 clicks, 4 clicks. There are a bunch of utilities that take 2 clicks, as they do, and there are some where it's right on their home page. What's the federal standard or the state standard for this? There isn't one. All right. All we're trying to do is get a sense of, are utilities making it easy for people to find this information? And in the case of Hamilton Township MUA, 2 clicks is not an outrageous number at all. You can't put everything on the front page. You can't put everything on the home page. And so 2 clicks is perfectly reasonable in order to be able to get to that information. So this is basically how Jersey Water works. WaterCheck will work. When is this going to come public? The expectation is that it will come public in February. So we're going to do a couple of months of data checking, system checking, make sure that everything works out, and then finalization and publishing in February. So stay tuned. And thank you, Jesse, for keeping track of us on all of this. So at this point, Jody has a poll that she wants to put up, and now is the time. And there is also a question, audience question there. Stephanie, back to you.
All right, so she will be putting a question in chat. So will your organization be interested in supporting the Jersey WaterCheck or WaterCheck rollout? So please type your name and organization if the answer is yes in the chat box. And thank you for sharing your interest in that. And I'll go ahead and let you all throw that in the chat boxes as we move on. But thank you, Dan and Jesse, for that demo. This looks like a really, really exciting, innovative tool that's coming out that will be really helpful for users to get a sense of of the data that's available and out there for that to them. And then to just reiterate, the goal is to go live with that in February of 2021. But yeah, I've seen a lot of action happening in the chat. I don't know how many questions have officially come through the Q&A yet, but I've definitely learned a lot today, and I hope that all of you have learned as much as I have as well. But before we open up the Q&A from our audience, I have one last question for our panelists. I was really excited when Jyoti asked if there was anything else I think we should add to the questions that we wanted to talk today. And one of my favorite questions to ask on our podcast, which is Water in Real Life, is people's biggest call to action. So I'm going to shoot this question out to each of the panelists in a minute or less. Give us your biggest call to action for everyone that's watching today. What do you want them to do with all of this information that we have shared with them today? And Winnie, I'm going to start with you.
Basically to work together, to collaborate, to hold their legislators accountable, and just use, like in Europe, the precautionary principle, which is like better safe than sorry, to make sure that they do that and they just don't act, just because of cost or money, and more in terms of health and the environment.
Absolutely. Stephen, I'm going to throw it to you now. Your biggest call to action for everyone.
I think Winnie's collaboration is a good one. I think a lot of the groups that I belong to, and I need to do a shout out to the Association of Environmental Authorities of New Jersey, because I left them off when I first was introducing myself. But I'm a director there too, and they do a lot of good work. But I think one of the things as we look at our information, people need to know that there is information out there, and hopefully there'll be more coming. But the other thing that they need to understand, especially as we go to dashboards and some of these other things, is just because your costs may be different or some of your metrics may be different, don't jump to conclusions right away. Sometimes you need to see the backstory that goes with each of those dashboards. So if you say, hey, I'm paying this much, and over there they're paying less, but what are they doing over there versus what are you doing at your utility? And that's a concern from a utility. But there's information out there, and I would like people to start to read it. It's nice when we get people to call and say, hey, I found out some information on our system on your website, from your consumer confidence report. People just don't take that time. And I think one of the big calls to action is to let people know that there are things like that out there.
Yeah, so don't just set it and forget it. You got to communicate about it too. Shadi, what's your biggest call to action?
I'm going to keep it to just on the data side of things, and I support everything. I'm glad that somebody else mentioned communication. That was one of mine. But I think that on the data side, my call to action is for on the utility side to measure, to start thinking about ways to think about all the strategic goals of your utility, what your board cares about, what your customers care about, what your funders and regulators care about, and find ways to create metrics to objectively measure how your system is doing against those, and set some targets and track that over time. So measure it, because you can't really change things unless you can measure it and figure out where, how you're doing, where your challenges are, and what you need to do to change those. So do that at the utility level. And then there are a lot of technical assistance providers on this call. So my call action to you all is to help the local governments and the utilities with that request, especially smaller systems that have less resources to be able to do that. You all are experts in these areas. Provide those services, and some of them might not be able to pay for all those services, but find ways to share your expertise and share those resources so that local governments and utilities could do that, could track their progress, and to communicate those things to their customers and to their regulators.
Well, as the self-described data nerd of the group, I wouldn't expect anything less than you to wrap that into data again. So thank you for that. And Dan, what is your biggest call to action for everyone watching?
That everyone has partial responsibility for making this all work. There's too much of a tendency to assume that somebody else is responsible for making sure that our water systems work, to make sure that our sewer systems work. Many people, perhaps most people in New Jersey, could not tell you where their water actually comes from, and certainly would have no idea where their wastewater goes except somewhere else. It goes away. Well, there's no way. There is no away. It's somebody else's here. So we all have a responsibility to understand the systems that support us, and to understand who is responsible for managing those systems, and to understand what they're trying to do. So my biggest ask for everybody is to become knowledgeable, and then to take that information and insist that our systems are properly managed in the long run.
Yes, wise words from all the panelists to close. So let's open up the floor to our audience for questions. Again, you can either use the chat feature or the Q&A. Jyoti's going to be monitoring both to summarize for us. Jyoti, do you have questions that have already come up so far?
Yeah, so there are two questions that have already come up so far. One is, what is the most important change to the WQAA legislation? Can go for any panelist.
When they say change, I'm not sure if they mean past change or a future change needed. So let me go out on a limb here, and I would say that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We have Water Quality Accountability Act for public water supply systems. It's about time for the sewer systems to step up as well.
I think one of the things that's going to come out is what we talked about before, where it's now the higher level of the organization is responsible for the certification. So hopefully, the buck no longer gets passed. I think the fact that going forward with some of the capital improvement information costs and future projects and needs is going to be another big item, because again, we've talked earlier, we hit on how do we afford this, affordability, and there's going to be some interesting things that are going to come up that it's going to cost money. So how do we do that? And I think one of the things on affordability, it's not quite part of WQAA, but it's going to have to be a statewide effort. It can't be like on a municipal utility authority or a municipal utility department. We don't have the same resources that an investor-owned utility might have. And so they're going to have to come up with some kind of program on a state level, because depending on where you live, costs might be affordable, and then you go somewhere else and maybe that same cost is no longer affordable. But there needs to be dialogue to answer the funding that's needed to maintain the systems and the affordability that goes along for the customers.
Great. And Jyoti, what was the second question that you had?
So the second question is for our panelist, Winnie. How can the public data gap be best filled to address the source to tap issue you raised?
Can you repeat it? I didn't catch the last part.
Sure. How can the public data gap be best filled to address the source to tap issue you raised?
Oh, well, basically in terms of a trust, there is such a lack of trust in terms of the water quality, and and a lot of people are going without water, drinking a lot less water, spending a lot more water on bottled water. And so if they were to trust the data, that's on the dashboard and see, in terms of the quality, the improvements that are being made, in terms of comparing, then in terms of the perception gap, it would narrow it. It wouldn't probably go back, like before when there was complete trust in the water system. That would take time, and then also legislation to change the chemicals and in the water, and then all of that. but at least, to also encourage people to take action. You see the data, and if there isn't something that you like or you agree with, then you can take action. I don't know. I hope I answered it. That's how I understood it.
Yeah. And I did see another question. Oh, go ahead, Jyoti.
Yeah, there's one more question, and then this is probably Dan, goes to Dan. Has anything surprised you as we have collected data for WaterCheck dashboard?
Well, part of the surprise was just how many different types of information we wanted to collect. Sometimes I think we were crazy. I don't know. I've been in the field long enough that I think I had a pretty good feel for what was going to come out of this. So I don't think there were any particular surprises from my perspective that came out of the data. What will be interesting is diving further into the data and seeing if we can tease out some lessons that we really just didn't understand before. Simple things, for instance, like what's the real difference in cost for systems that use groundwater versus just systems that use surface water? We know that it exists, but how big is it, and how much of that, just that one factor, is playing a difference in terms of the cost for water in the state of New Jersey? So I can't say there were any huge surprises, frankly. Steve.
Oh,
yeah.
Stephen.
I was going to say, with this dashboard and whatnot that we're rolling out, I think one of the key things is a lot of the people that are probably participating right now, they're already involved. So we're not really doing this information for the people that are involved. It's theoretically the people that are our customers as a utility and our neighbors. So how do we drive, it's great to do all this, it's great to collect this information and put it out there, but how do we drive people to it? And that's going to be the key, because if people are apathetic, or they complain but they don't do anything, I think one of the real goals and measures of success is not that you've compiled this data, but have you driven people to look at this data and utilize this data? I think that will be our real determination of whether or not we've been a success or not.
Yes, adoption is key to really creating that impact that you want, and communicating the value of that adoption to people's everyday real lives, into everyday's real lives is that's the challenge, that's the part, and that's the communication piece. And then you're getting into my world, and we have 3 minutes and not enough time to talk about all of that. So I think, Jyoti, unless you wanted to jump into another question, I feel like that's a great panel. It's a great way to end on.
Yeah, so we have just one last question that I want to bring up. There was a question on, is there any data on danger of oil and gas pipeline and infrastructure that go under rivers and water bodies due to the fact that there are many accidents that lead to toxic releases into water systems? So more a question of, is there data out there on the danger of oil and gas pipelines? Panelists' thoughts.
I've seen quite a few articles on it, but I don't know about specific data, just articles reporting on the dangers and accidents that have happened, but I'm not aware of any specific data out there. Not that I've done the research looking for it.
Right. Yeah, the only thing that I've heard was a few years back, there was a NJIT researcher, Dr. Jean Golub, who's since passed away, unfortunately, who was doing extensive national research on the, much as we focus on water and wastewater infrastructure, he was focused on oil and gas infrastructure and looking at the integrity of those systems and ways of predicting integrity and so on. So I know research like that has been done, but I'm not aware of any authoritative source offhand, because it's not my area of research.
Nice. Well, great questions. I want to again thank all of our panelists today for such an informative session. And I also want to thank Jesse and Raptelis for the demo of the dashboard. And thank you to the audience for being engaged and joining us for this virtual panel discussion. Be sure to check out Jersey WaterWorks website for information about a sign-on letter that can help support more funding. And if you've not done so yet, also remember to become a member of Jersey WaterWorks. And finally, we want to remind our audience to attend the virtual exhibition area of this conference and take a break. Take a break and come back for the workshop starting at 1 p.m. and just have a great day, a great rest of your day, and a great weekend. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to
Thank you.
for being a great moderator.
Yes, thank you,
Thank you.
Stephanie.
Very good.